Good evening, everyone. Welcome all, and thank you for joining us today from the United States and all around the world. We are gathered today to observe Tamil Genocide Remembrance Day. Today marks the 12th year anniversary of Mullawaikal massacre, where the Tamil people suffered over 140,000 deaths and many more disappearances and other human rights atrocity along with mass displacement. My name is Priya Kuganendran, and it's my honor to MC this event on behalf of the Tamil Americans United Political Action Committee. This evening, this evening, we'll have remarks from a few predominant Tamil political and civil society leaders, followed by US leaders who champion human rights. Please note, those who are joining us from Sri Lanka are under heavy military scrutiny and at risk of being detained. We applaud your bravery. We will commence this Remembrance Day with lighting of the lamps to honor the victims and survivors of Sri Lankan armed conflict. Please light the lamp at this time. As we light this traditional oil lamp, we remember the lives lost and forever changed in the Tamil genocide. Today, we honor the memory of those whose lives were lost, may live in forever in the hearts of Tamil people. Now we will observe a moment of silence to honor all victims by closing our eyes for a few moments. Thank you. Next, we have All Faith Prayer by Father Rohan Dominic. Father Rohan is the representative of the Clerdian Congregation for United Nations Economic Social Council, Civil Society, New York.
All gracious and merciful God, source of all life, we thank you for gathering us together from different places and backgrounds today. Loving God, we come to you with heavy hearts, remembering several thousands of our beloved brothers and sisters murdered during the last battle in Mullawaikal. In the horrors of the history, so many of our kith and kin were targeted because of their identity as Tamils and killed mercilessly. Once again, on this 12th year, we recognize their hopes and aspirations and their love and admiration to their land, their homeland. With weariness and sorrow, we remember how they were not given a decent and traditional caste ritual, especially the Karyam, which is essential for the departed soul to attain bliss. And the political and military powers are still preventing the relatives to mourn peacefully for their beloved dead. As we commemorate the horrors that were committed not long ago, we honor all the dead, the heroes, the martyrs, the victims, and the survivors. We ask for your presence in our midst, for healing, light, and love to soothe and ease our pain. We remember before you all the survivors and those who bear the inner and outer scars of genocide and of subsequent acts of intimidation and terror. Restrain those who are filled with hatred and use false patriotism and violence to pursue their ends. Change their heart. We ask that you help us to forever remember and share the stories we hold in our hearts. As tales of the atrocities are shared, we ask that these memories be strengthened and never fade, in the hope that those who remember the mistakes of the past will not repeat them. May this Mulivaikal remembrance make us alert to the reality of evil and its deceptive allure. They still continue in different forms, not allowing us to live in peace, doing our business, and build our future. Help us also to stand up against evil and oppression. Give us the wisdom to strategize our moves, to demand justice and accountability for those who lost their lives. Enable us to empower those who are not strong enough to defend themselves. We pray that our cry and call for justice may not fall in the deaf ears of the international actors, and that they should not be indifferent for the legitimate aspirations of the Tamils as they did 12 years ago. We pray also for those who fight for freedom and justice always prevail, and that those who need protection do not become victims. As we honor and pray for the lives and the memories of our beloved by observing this day, we seek the strength and the courage to join hands as Elam Tamils, regardless of our differences, to raise our voices and work tirelessly so that there may be justice for the victims of Tamil genocide and true peace be restored in our land.
Thank you, Father Rohan, for the prayers. Moving on to the Tamil matters, we have Meena Ilancheyan, Tamil Americans United Action Committee President and a Tamil community leader.
Thank you, Priya. Vanakkam. Good evening, distinguished leaders, speakers, Tamil activists, and friends. To know where we want to go, it is important to know where we came from. History is important. I'm going to share a couple of slides. Let me go into a sharing. Murali, can you enable me to share? Okay, thank you. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the systematic genocide that happened in Sri Lanka, a little bit about the early history. So let's start with that. The Tamil language and civilization is ancient. Let me. Tamils have been living in Ulam, now Sri Lanka, for thousands of years and have been ruling themselves. Kingdom of Jaffna is one of them. The Portuguese and the Dutch came to Sri Lanka in the 16th and 17th centuries and the British in 1796. The Tamil and the Sinhala kingdom still existed as separate entities. In 1833, the British amalgamated the two nations into one for administrative purposes. They left in 1948, giving independence to Sri Lanka, handing over the power to the Sinhalese majority. It was the dawn of the Tamil genocide and prosecution of other minorities. The nation building was planned on Sinhala Buddhist supremacists. The successive governments used Sinhala Buddhist nationalism to win elections. The government came up with a Citizenship Act, which made 1 million Tamil plantation workers stateless. Then came the Sinhala Only Act in 1956, which made Sinhalese as the official language and the requirement to get government jobs. It forced many Tamils to take early retirement. With Srimavo's Shastri Pact of 1974, thousands of Tamils were sent back to Tamil Nadu, India. The discrimination not only affected Tamils, but other minorities too. European descents called burghers left Sri Lanka to Australia in 1972 because of government prosecution. Any peaceful protest or political action was met with state-sponsored violence. The main aim was to destroy the Tamils, their language, culture, and religious beliefs. The major incident on cultural destructions have been the attack on unarmed civilians during the last day of Tamil World Research Conference in 1974. The other one is the burning of the Jaffna Library in 1981, where 97,000 volumes of books and culturally important and irreplaceable manuscripts were destroyed. There have been periodic state-sponsored genocidal attacks on Tamils, the major ones in 1956, 58, 77, 83, known as the Black July. This marked the new chapter in Tamil struggle, the armed freedom struggle by Tamil youths. The next two slides are about hope and action in taking this important issue forward. In this call, we have our leaders who are the voice to the voiceless, and I'm sure you will be hearing more about these following in their speeches. The Sri Lankan genocide against Tamils resolution 2015. This resolution was led and adopted by the Northern Provincial Council in Sri Lanka under the leadership of then Chief Minister Justice C.V. Wigneswaran. He has joined the call with us today. Last year, we had the P2B key request led by the People Uprising Movement, emphasizing on ICC referral and referendum and to find a permanent political solution. One of the key organizers of P2P March, Velan Swamigal, has also joined us. Tamil Nadu Assembly Resolution of 2013 is an unanimous resolution by the Tamil Nadu state government urging for a referendum for the Tamil people living in Sri Lanka and for the displaced Tamils. In March this year, our Congresswoman, Deborah, she's also joined the call, led a bipartisan joint letter to Secretary Blinken on Sri Lanka urging for an international investigation mechanism. I am sure we'll be hearing more and the latest happening in Congress from her. Earlier this month, Ontario Legislative Assembly passed the Bill 104, Tamil Genocide Education Week Act, which will be observed from May 11th to 18th every year. Recently, Dr. McDermott, an Australian politician, spoke at the New South Wales Parliament about the Tamil genocide, and he said, "It's not about if we want to recognize the Tamil genocide, but when." In January this year, 21 French MPs wrote a letter to their president, Emmanuel Macron, urging France to use its influence to find a lasting and shared peace where the Tamil people can finally live in safety. We are positive and hopeful that we are going in the right direction, have support of our leaders, and the genocide that happened in Sri Lanka will be solved at the international arena. Nandri. Thank you.
Thank you, Meena, for the clear history of Tamils on the island and some recent developments in getting genocide recognition. Next, we have Most Reverend Christian Noel Emmanuel, who is the Catholic Bishop of Trincomalee. As a bishop from the eastern part of Sri Lanka, he's accompanying not only the Tamils of Eastern Province, but also play an important role nationally as a Tamil spiritual leader. He is also a leader of the Tamil Civil Society Forum.
Unmute, Father.
I'm sorry. Hello, everyone. Good evening to everyone in America, and good morning to everyone in Sri Lanka. Thank you for inviting me to be part of this program. I would like to speak with regard to post-Mullivai situation in the Eastern Province. We, the Tamil community all over the world, remembered on 18th May, today for you, the killing of thousands of our people in Mullivai during the last phase of war. World community knows about this last phase of war, where, according to UN reports, remote number of people killed was 40,000, but the internal UN report suggested that the number could be as much as 70,000. Many were injured, and they kept moving, carrying their children and the elderly to save their lives. These people who survived this war were kept like in concentration camps. They went through extreme experience of fear, helplessness, and humiliation. Right to remember is key to victims who did not have the luxury of burying their dead, and survivors themselves were at risk of being killed. Giving a proper and decent burial is part of reconciliation. Hence, they prefer to go to Mullivai every year and pay their respect to their loved ones who were killed. But unfortunately, except on one or two occasions, this was denied or blocked by the existing governments every year, or those who organized threatened. This year too, a few priests and some civilians took a plaque to be placed at the memorial site. The plaque was removed by them that night, and the monument was also damaged. Police went to the courts to get an injunction preventing people from visiting Mullivai on this particular day, but they could not succeed. But the government imposed travel restrictions. War was over in 2009, but government failed to initiate reconciliation process, calling all religious and community leaders to play an active role.
Sorry, Reverend Emmanuel. If you're not speaking, would you please mute your line? We're just hearing other conversations. Thank you.
Could I continue?
Yeah, let's try it again. Thank you very much.
War was over in 2009, but the government failed to initiate reconciliation process, calling all religious and community leaders to play an active role. The attitude was, war is over, so there is peace. There's no need for reconciliation. People continue to suffer without basic facilities today. Many could not go back to their own land as they were occupied by military. It took years for them to release some of these lands. Many Tamils are in prisons as political prisoners without any trial. People seek justice, compensation, decent and peaceful living, livelihood, and reconciliation. We had greater hope in the previous government, but all fell into singular Buddhist agenda of the majority. Eastern province comprises 3 districts: Trincomalee, Batticaloa, and Ampara. Unlike northern province, eastern province, especially Trincomalee district, is populated with multi-religious and multi-ethnic communities. I place before you some of our concerns. Number one, Sinhala Buddhist nation. This idea is continually put into the minds of Sinhala Buddhists in the south. They go on constructing Buddhist temples all over Sri Lanka with the support of Archaeological Department, Forest Department, and Central Environment Authority, and the protection of armed forces. Buddhist monks with their fundamentalist attitude go about erecting Buddha statues and putting up Buddhist temples, even in places where there are no Buddhists. Kanya in Trincomalee, Kanya Hindu temple in Trincomalee and its surroundings, especially 7 hot wells, were frequented by all communities for the last many years. The place was maintained and administered by the temple authorities and village council. With the end of war, the temple and the surroundings were taken over by a Buddhist monk. The temple was destroyed, a Buddha statue was erected, and a residence for the Buddhist monk was put up. Kenya has become a lost dream for Tamils. Similarly, they also have hidden agenda of taking over important Hindu temples and their administration. Number 2, lands that traditionally belong to Tamils are taken over by Sinhalese with the support of the government officials. Mailathamadu pasture land in Ampara district is an example. For generations, Tamil in Ampara district took their cattle for grazing to this land. But recently, this land was forcibly taken over by Sinhala settlers. No action was taken by authorities to return the land. Number 3, Sinhala settlements in traditional Tamil lands. Government promotes new Sinhala settlements in Trincomalee in order to increase the Sinhala population in the area. This move creates more tension and unrest among communities. Indian returnees. Tamils who migrated to India in Tamil Nadu state are to return to their own places in Trincomalee. But when they return, basic facilities like shelter, sanitation, water are never given or intentionally delayed, discouraging them from coming. In short, forceful spread of the religion is done with the support of the state. Intentional singular settlements are done in order to take control of the East religiously and politically. Traditional lands that belong to Tamil community are grabbed to erect Buddhist temples and eventually for singular settlements. In all government sectors, land, permits, transfers, new appointments, etc., priority is given to singular community. The outcome will be there is tension and unrest among communities. No initiatives taken for a peaceful living and reconciliation, though there is inter-religious forum created and functioning in all 3 districts. Government is bent on reducing the Tamil population and take full control of the eastern province. People have lost hope and confidence in the government, as it is very clear that singular majority is working with their own agenda. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Reverend Emmanuel. Velan Swamigal is from Tamil Civil Society in Sri Lanka and a spiritual seeker, teacher, and leader. He organized the most recent Tamil uprising in Sri Lanka called P2P. Here is Velan Swamigal.
Vanakkam, good evening, and good morning to all distinguished leaders, speakers, and Tamil activists. First of all, I would like to take this opportunity to thank Tamil Americans United PAC for organizing such a wonderful event at this particular day. As earlier our Reverend Bishop also mentioned, I would like to continue from there. The Sri Lankan state is systematically doing the structural genocide. And as part of this structural genocide, the land grabbing, especially in the northern eastern part of Sri Lanka, where it is our homeland, the Sri Lankan state is systematically grabbing the lands in the name of archaeology department or Department of Wild Animals or Mahavali Authority, etc., etc., here and there, and especially to divide the north and east so that the Tamils who are living here, we are not connected geographically by land-wise. When we are connected by land-wise, or when there's a continuity in the land, then only we are very strong to claim this is our homeland physically. And also we are very much clear or eligible for self-determination. So likewise, in 2009, in the Mullivakal, the massive genocide in this 21st century in the world, 140,000 people were killed. And these killings are not war crimes, or these are not crimes against humanity, because the killings and damaging the properties, etc., etc., were carried out by the Sri Lankan military forces with an intention. So when it is done with intention, it is genocide. It is not war crime. So in that way, it is clearly, we can say that Tamil genocide, and it is not only that massive killing from the day the Sri Lanka got independence from the British, from that day onwards, even till now, till this moment, this structural genocide is happening. And we don't have any hope from the Sri Lankan state that they will give any acceptable, reasonable justice or solution for us. So we seek the international community to interfere, to give some pressure to the Sri Lankan state. Then only the justice will be established, a proper solution for the Tamil national question will be given. Recently, we have organized a March event known as Pottiviltu Polikandi, P2P, and we were having the main two demands. The main two demands of this P2P march was refer Sri Lanka to International Criminal Court, ICC, for war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide committed against the Tamil by the Sri Lankan state. That was our primary request. And secondly, also, furthermore, we expected, or we had the demand or request as a guarantee that the genocide that took place against Tamils is not repeated. That is very, very important. And a permanent political solution should be found by getting the wishes of the Tamil people, Elam Tamils, through internationally conducted and monitored referendum. So these are the main two requests we expressed during the P2P march, and our people here, the Tamil national political leaders, civil societies, religious leaders, the people, like in a massive way, they gave tremendous support and they expressed their feelings and thoughts and their wishes during the P2P march. After 12 years are over of the great genocide or the last war, even now people have that wish and they are having those feelings for our homeland. And this was the opportunity where they were able to express. So in this particular moment, we request the distinguished leaders, speakers who are here, especially from US state representing, please consider our request. And this is just for justice. As a human being in this world, every human has to give their support for us. And we are only speaking the facts and the truth. And the nations or the Western countries, especially US, has got the power to interfere and to support the Tamils who are living in north and eastern part of Sri Lanka to put some pressure. And we are expecting remedial justice for this genocide. So the remedial justice only can give a permanent political solution for us. And we seek the international support. And our Elam Tamils, wherever they live, whether it is in US, North Carolina, or in other parts of US, or in the Europe, or in Australia, wherever, all of them are having the same thoughts. And they are supporting us who are living here in north and eastern part of Sri Lanka. And when this structural genocide is accepted, and when it is referred to the ICC, International Criminal Court, then only these leaders of the military forces in Sri Lanka, they will be punished so that we can have some faith that this structural genocide will not repeat again. Since the international community is not much involving or trying to take up this matter to the ICC, they are very free and they think they can do anything. Even now, the militarization in the north and eastern part of Sri Lanka is, you can just see, if you take one citizen, there are more than 2 or 3 Sri Lankan soldiers for each one citizen here. And the president will come up and publish a bill or a gazette notice, and next day that action will be taken and nobody can question. Even if they arrest some activist or some journalist, nobody can question, and they do whatever they want to do because very strong action has not been taken up against the present government who were ruling during the last war times in 2009. So we again request the US state representatives here, please consider our request, our thoughts, our feelings, and take up some action against the present Sri Lankan state so that we can live here at least peacefully. We don't know what will happen to us in the next moment. We are living in a very critical situation. So we again and again urge all of you to take the action. And I would like to conclude my short speech here. And again, we take this opportunity to pray for the rest in peace, the 140,000 people, our relatives, our friends, kith and kin, were brutally killed during this final war in 2009 in this land, Mullivakal. And on this day, we all are like in the feelings, and we strongly believe the justice, the permanent political solution for Tamils in Sri Lanka will be gained. And thank you very much. And I would like to take this opportunity to thank the US representatives. They have allocated their valuable time for this particular event. And also, I would like to thank once again the Tamil Americans United PAC, the Political Action Committee, to organize such this event. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Swamigal. Thank you for laying out the request from the Sri Lankan Tamils. Next, we have Justice C.V. Wigneswaran. He's the leader of the Tamil People's Alliance and a member of the Sri Lankan Parliament. He's the first Chief Minister of the Tamil Majority Northern Province and is a former Supreme Court judge. As Meena mentioned, during his time as a Chief Minister, he introduced the resolution on Tamil genocide calling for international investigation by International Criminal Court.
Welcome, everybody. It was a sad day in the year 2009 that we remember today. As far as we Sri Lankan Tamils in the north and east are concerned, we have to face many obstacles even today, as stated by my predecessor. On one hand, COVID-19 is playing havoc among us. On the other hand, we face repression by the state in many ways. Personally, I would be called upon in a day or two to answer criminal charges for saying, one, that the Tamil language was the language of the earliest inhabitants of this island. Two, that Mahavansa is not a historical document. Three, that the LTTE took up to arms because of the repression and discrimination by the Sri Lankan state. Four, that over a lakh of people were killed in Mudivaikal at the close of the war. And five, that the armed forces have taken over civil functions and the north is kept under army rule. All of which are true. These are true statements, but have been made out to be criminal statements. I'm told by these statements I have propagated national and racial hatred that constitutes incitement to violence. Thus, repressive and reprehensible activities we face here in the north and east continuously. It is amidst them that we remember our dead who passed away at Mudivaikal in May 2009. The British and the Tamils were tricked by the Sinhalese leaders at the time of independence. Many promises were given prior to independence that minorities would not be discriminated against and they would be treated with fraternal feeling. But within 1 year of independence, 1 million Tamils were deprived of their suffrage, franchise. We, Tamil speaking, are the majority in the north and east of Sri Lanka. But our individuality is at stake. There are steps being taken inter alia to grab our traditional homelands, to introduce Buddhism forcibly into areas where there are no indigenous Buddhists living with military help, to have our resources plundered, to colonize settlements with Sinhala colonists who have been brought from elsewhere into Tamil-speaking areas, and to have the demography of the area changed and to destroy war memorials. It was to protect us from such genocidal acts on the part of the successive governments that our youth took up to arms. But due to the geopolitics of big powers, they were routed in 2009 together with over a lakh of innocents in Mudivaikal. Justice to those whose dear ones disappeared eludes them even today. But those who committed, aided and abetted brutal criminal acts against our people are being given important governmental positions and diplomatic posts. Today we witness the sorry spectacle of memorials erected in remembrance of those who died at the end of the war 12 years ago being broken and destroyed. The international community is unable to do anything about it. A government in power seems to be able to attack and harm our people in Sri Lanka, but the international community can do nothing about it. In 2013, the then Conservative Prime Minister of Great Britain, Honorable David Cameron, visited us in Jaffna. At that stage, he promised us that justice and accountability for what happened in Mudivaikal would be ensured. But anything tangible are still to be done. Even now, the Conservative are back in power in Great Britain. When independence from Britain to Ceylon was given, the singular leaders of that time deceived the British by saying that they would look after the interests of the minorities. But as soon as independence was obtained, as I said earlier, over 1 million Tamils from the upcountry were denied their citizenship. Thereafter, there had been periodical discriminatory steps taken to undermine the safety and well-being of the Tamil-speaking Sri Lanka. Britain failed to ensure that there would be safety and fair play as far as the minorities in Ceylon were concerned, as it was called earlier. The mistake made at the time of independence wherein adequate safeguards against the hegemony of the majority were not ensured by giving a federal constitution to Ceylon, that still has its adverse effect on Sri Lanka even today. But I would say that it is time now for the Conservative government of Britain to ensure justice and fair play to our people. The mistake made during the term of office of Prime Minister Honorable Clement Attlee must now be corrected. I make this humble request on behalf of our people. It is certainly heartening to see that the Democratic Party, which worked hard in the UN to bring resolutions against Sri Lankan government, is now back in power in the US. US, together with Great Britain, must ensure justice and accountability for the crimes perpetrated in Mullawaikal in May 2009. Thus, taking Sri Lanka before the International Criminal Court stands a priority for the US and UK and other countries who value democracy and fair play. It is high time an international body of experts on military law be asked to inquire into the need for the military, which committed severe human rights violations during the war, to continue to prolong their stay for the past 12 years. The government has publicly assured that the LTT is no more. It has assured our country that there are no semblance of any attempt at violence of any sort in the north and east up to now. If so, why should the armed forces continue to be in the north and east? It is not enough to say in a democracy for security reasons without spelling out what those security reasons are. We find the military holding on to over 60,000 acres of state land and over 3,000 acres of private land. We find them getting involved directly or indirectly in cultivation, fishing, trading, expropriation of our resources, and so on. We find them helping those who are interested in land grabbing in the north and east coming from elsewhere. We find them aiding and abetting those who are trying to distort history. We find them trying to brainwash our people, especially the youngsters, by working on their poverty and indigent circumstances. Therefore, security reasons cannot be the motive for the military continuing to occupy our traditional homelands for 12 years after the war.
Dayalan, please unmute. Dayalan, you are muted. Okay, good.
I had suggested when I was chief minister that if lack of space was the reason not to house the military in Colombo and its suburbs, the government could divide its military into 9 parts and establish their 1/9 military in each of the 9 provinces. Why should the government garrison such a large contingent of the military in the north and east alone? Does the government intend placing an occupational army in the north and east forever, curtailing, controlling, commanding, and covering our people by spying on them under the cover of intelligence gathering? Are we not entitled to a free, democratic, and uninterfered existence in our traditional homeland? Surely, the police could now take over security since it is peacetime now. It is important, in order to bring an end to the suffering of the Tamil-speaking majority in the north and east of Sri Lanka, that an internationally supervised referendum be conducted in the north and east. That is the most democratic step that the international community could take to ensure peace and reconciliation in Sri Lanka. This attempt to usher in a referendum among the majority Tamil-speaking people in the north and east must be ensured by not only US and the UK, but also Canada, India, Australia, the European Union and many other countries which value democracy and democratic institutions. An internationally supervised referendum among the people of the North and East would no doubt ensure democracy, peace, and preserve human rights in this region. May I appeal to Congress Lady Deborah K. Ross, Congress Lady Kathy Manning, State Senator Wiley Nickel, and State Senator Jeff Jackson, who are all attending this event to work towards an internationally supervised referendum in the Tamil-speaking northern and eastern provinces of Sri Lanka to find a permanent solution to the 70-year-old Tamil question, as well as to fully cooperate in our effort to bring Sri Lanka before the ICC. May we all, the Tamils the world over, take an oath on this day that despite all obstacles, we would in unison work for justice and accountability for the genocide committed at Mullawaikal in 2009. I thank you.
Thank you, Justice Wigneswaran. We're running a few minutes behind schedule, for the speakers that are coming from here onward. If you can keep to the allotted time, that'll be greatly appreciated. We would like to complete this event by the planned time of 9:30. Gajendrakumar Ponnampalam is a Tamil lawyer, politician, and member of parliament. He is the leader of the Tamil National People's Front. He's also a Tamil genocide survivor. Here is Mr. Gajendrakumar.
Thank you very much, Priya. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Continue.
Thank you very much. The problem with coming down the speakers list is most of what I intended to say has already in some ways been said. So I'll try and, instead of repetition, I'll try and give a slightly different perspective, but an important one, because, there are, even within the Tamil people, there are different narratives. And I think most of the problems arise because we don't see many things in its proper context. So in context, even when we talk in terms of genocide, to give the context as to what exactly is happening, I think is very important. Generally speaking, there is a tendency for not only just Ulam Tamil people, but also other friends from other nations and communities to focus on the loss of life as the main sort of, modus operandi behind all for justice genocide. But I think we need to take a step back and look at things in its proper context. And when we do that, I think the question of intention, the question of acts, whether in fact it can be proved or not, all of that will fall into place. Now, Justice Wigneswaran and I think some of the other speakers also mentioned, I think Justice Wigneswaran mentioned the Mahavamsa, where he said that he's being persecuted primarily because he had said that the Mahavamsa is not a factual document, that it is, and in fact he's right. It is a political document because the Mahavamsa says that the Sinhalese people are the chosen people by Lord Buddha, and asks them, or at least beholds on them, the responsibility to protect Buddhism in its most purest form. Now that sort of responsibility that has been given the Sinhalese people has essentially, literally controlled almost all of their political actions on this island. And to keep Buddhism in its purest form in Sri Lanka, it means to say that the Sri Lankan state, when it comes to the Sri Lankan state, the state has to be in the complete custody of those chosen Sinhala Buddhist people. And that is the intention with which every government, not just the Mahinda Rajapaksa government that we tend to focus on today, but every government that has come to power in Sri Lanka has acted. So the idea that the Tamil people in the Northeast live with a very real existence that can qualify for nationhood. And what I mean by nationhood is that you know that the international system is such that when people qualify for nationhood only, such people can aspire to statehood. So you have to in some way qualify for nationhood in order to aspire for statehood. In order to claim the right to self-determination, you have to qualify in reality so that you can show that you exist as a nation. And what are those pillars that make you qualify for nationhood? The fact that you have a distinct language, that you have a distinct culture, that you have a distinct territory that you occupy, and that you can sustain your collective being through a collective economy, that you all are self-sustaining. So those are the fundamental pillars on which statehood, nationhood is recognized politically everywhere. And the fact is that in this island, the Tamils qualify for that identity of nationhood. And Sinhala leaders have always, if you look at the 73-year history of Sri Lanka since the British departed, every single act that the state has taken towards the Tamils, or for that matter, the non-Sinhala Buddhists, has been to ensure that their hegemony over the Sri Lankan state cannot be challenged. So in other words, what has been happening to the Tamils is that every one of those four pillars that make us qualify for nationhood is being systematically dismantled. I think that is extremely important to understand. Speakers before me spoke in terms of we are losing land. Speakers before me spoke in terms of the militaries doing economic sort of agriculture and various that they're getting involved in the economy of the East. And what is effectively happening is that people who have been subjected to war conditions for nearly 32 years and who have since the end of the war for the last 12 years have not been given any form of protection to protect first their economy and allow it to grow, are simply made to compete with the rest of the country, which they can't do. So you are literally losing your economic power. You can't survive. You're forced to flee because you can't survive. So all of those acts are systematically targeting every one of those pillars that makes us a nation. And it is only by dismantling the existence of the Tamils as a nation that the Sinhala Buddhists claim to Sri Lanka being the Sinhalese being the custodians of Sri Lanka and protecting Buddhism in its purest form can in some way be sustained. So the loss of life is something that is very easy because it has happened within the last decade and we have sufficient proof for it. But to simply talk only in terms of the loss of life, which happened towards the major part of it happened towards the latter part of the war, I think takes away the actual deep entrenched genocidal intent of every single consecutive government that has been in power. So our view, I think I'm going to echo the views of the speakers before me. Our view is that Tamil nationhood has to be protected. It has to be recognized. And the only way through which that can happen is by recognizing nationhood. I mean, you can. I mean, if it is the nation that is being destroyed and genocide being committed, there is no point in giving a political solution or some sort of constitutional, going through a process that does not recognize that very thing that is being destroyed. So our view is that nationhood recognition is something that is inalienable. It has to be the cornerstone on which any step that is taken in the future, whether the Tamil people think in terms of finding a political solution where we can try and coexist with the Sinhalese, or even if it means that no, it's come to a point that we have to part ways, it has to be on the basis of that red line has to be drawn on the basis of Tamil nationhood. And so on that basis, I think I will also echo the question of a referendum. I just want to put this out. You see, already in 1977, the Tamil people, in fact, had a referendum. The TULF, when it contested after the Vatukotte resolutions in 76, specifically contested on the question of wanting to create a separate state. So the Tamil people already have given a mandate for that. If we are talking in terms of a referendum, especially since the international community has been trying to say that, look, reconciliation has to happen, we must have a political process through which solutions must be found, that referendum must echo, obviously, what has happened in the past. You can't leave that option out and talk in terms of, let's say, for example, the Rajapaksa government is trying to bring in a new constitution. They can bulldoze a new constitution simply because they have a 2/3 majority in parliament. And if they do, and it is not according to the aspirations of the Tamil people, you can't provide that as an option for of a referendum without, in fact, calling for, or at least have the option of what the Tamils had already decided upon over 30 years ago. So I think those details also have to be very carefully thought out. The fact that the Tamil people as a party leader, even if we engage with the Sri Lankan state in finding a political solution, we have no right to take a decision on behalf of our people. On the contrary, we will have to offer whatever solution that we think the Tamil people should consider to the Tamil people to ultimately decide whether they are going to accept that, or whether they are in fact going to reiterate their position that they took up in 77. I think that is the only right way to go about it. So on that basis, whilst I would once again like to, genocide that is taking place is to destroy the Tamils as a nation. I think that is what we have to focus on, because the loss of life, the loss of all the other pillars of our identity is in fact with that intention. If we focus on that, then I'm pretty sure we can move forward together. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Gajendrakumar. Next is an individual well known to many Tamils. Within a short time of being sworn into the US Congress, Congresswoman Deborah Ross led initiatives, as mentioned before, the joint letter to Secretary of State Blinken, and another landmark initiative in the Tamil American history, which she will share with us today. As she promised to us at the last year's Genocide Day, she has been a powerful voice in the US Congress for Tamil Americans. Thank you for all you have done for Tamils. Here's Congresswoman Ross.
Well, thank you so much, Priya, and it's wonderful to be with you yet again and with the Tamil community all around the world. I'm honored to be with you and to remember the innocent lives tragically lost in the final stages of the war in Sri Lanka, and to be reminded, as we just were, about what those lives represent in terms of the Tamil community. I'm grateful to the Tamil American community here in North Carolina, not only for their contribution to the community in the United States, but for their unyielding commitment to justice for the Tamil people. A commitment reflected through continuous education of elected officials, including myself, on the Tamil genocide, and through cultural activities. Today, as we reflect on the 12 years since the end of the war, Sri Lanka stands at a crossroads. In her January 27th report, the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Michelle Bachelet, stated that there are clear warning signs that past violations could be repeated. Indeed, more than a decade after the war, I'm concerned to see the Sri Lankan government elevate individuals credibly accused of war crimes to senior posts, obstructing efforts to investigate and prosecute war crimes, destabilizing democratic institutions, and continuing to stifle civil society and militarize the Tamil regions, which you've heard about already this evening. It's my firm belief that the United States leads best when we do that with our values, a commitment to freedom, human rights, and democracy. That's why I'm proud to have worked on so many issues regarding Sri Lanka and Tamil Americans since I entered Congress. Earlier this year, I led a bipartisan congressional letter to Secretary of State Anthony Blinken, which you've heard about before, that urged him to center human rights and democracy at the forefront of engagement for Sri Lanka, and to make every effort to promote international accountability for Sri Lanka. For too long, there's been a clear lack of domestic political will in Sri Lanka to make tangible progress on accountability for the atrocities of the war. That's simply unacceptable. The Tamil people deserve justice, accountability, and the ability to live with peace and dignity in their homeland. This week, a congressional resolution that I co-authored honors the lives lost in the war and expresses support for justice and accountability, and it moves forward towards passage. And this year, I hope to organize a congressional hearing to address the past and ongoing human rights abuses in Sri Lanka. The global Tamil community gathered here today as we remember this tragedy, the victims and their families, and the survivors. To you, please know that I see you, I hear you, I mourn with you, and I stand with you in Congress. I'm here with you tonight to show respect and to thank you for all that you do.
Thank you again for your continuous support, Deborah Ross. Now we have Ernest Rajakone to share the highlights of the resolution that was introduced on this 12th year anniversary of Tamil Genocide.
Well,
your speedy speaking skills here.
Yeah. Thanks again to Representative Ross and her staff for the leadership on this resolution. And as this resolution is fairly long and goes into these issues at some depth, for the request of the organizers, I've taken some key excerpts to share today. A resolution recognizing 12 years since the end of the war in Sri Lanka on May 18, 2009, honoring the lives lost and expressing support for justice, accountability, reconciliation, reconstruction, reparation, and reform in Sri Lanka to ensure a lasting peaceful political solution and a prosperous future for all people of Sri Lanka. Whereas May 18, 2021 marks the 12-year anniversary of the end of the 26-year armed conflict between the government of Sri Lanka and various armed Tamil independence organizations, including the Liberation Tigers of Tamil Erlam. Whereas the Tamil people of Sri Lanka suffered tens of thousands of deaths, displacement, disappearances, and abuse. Whereas the northeastern region of the country, the traditional Tamil homeland, remains heavily militarized with up to 1 soldier for every 2 civilians in the most war-affected regions. Whereas the Northern Provincial Council of Sri Lanka adopted in resolutions calling for an international investigation into alleged war crimes committed during the armed conflict and for a UN-monitored referendum in the northeastern region of the island to support the development of a permanent political solution. Whereas the government of Sri Lanka has postponed provincial elections for multiple years, denying all Sri Lankans, including the Tamil people in the Northern Province and the Eastern Province, their democratic right to local representation. Whereas a 2021 report from the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights found that the government of Sri Lanka over the past year has elevated individuals implicated in war crimes to senior governmental positions, pardoned a convicted war criminal, reversed key democratic reforms and consolidated power behind the office of the president, obstructed efforts to investigate and prosecute perpetrators of war crime, promoted majoritarian and exclusionary rhetoric, engaged in surveillance and harassment of civil society organizations and human rights advocates, and allegedly employed security forces to abduct and torture dissidents. And whereas the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, Michelle Bachelet, stated in January 2021, given the demonstrated inability and unwillingness of the government to advance accountability at the national level, it is time for international action to ensure justice for international crimes. States should also pursue investigations and prosecution in their national courts under accepted principles of extraterritorial or universal jurisdiction. And whereas families of individuals who disappeared during and following the armed conflict will have no information regarding the whereabouts of their loved ones, and no list of persons who surrendered to the government after the end of the armed conflict have been published. And whereas progress on domestic and international investigations into reports of war crimes and human rights during the conflict and the promotion of reconciliation would facilitate United States engagement and investment in Sri Lanka and demonstrate support for international rule of law, now therefore be it resolved, the House of Representatives, 1, acknowledges the 12th anniversary of the end of the war in Sri Lanka and offer the deepest condolences to all those affected by the conflict. 2, honors the memory of those who died and reaffirms its solidarity with the people of all communities in Sri Lanka in their search for reconciliation, reconstruction, reparation, and reform. 3, commends the United Nations Human Rights Council for prioritizing the collection and preservation of evidence related to human rights violations, a process that must not be interfered with by the government of Sri Lanka. 4, recognizes the bravery and commitment of advocates for justice across all communities in Sri Lanka, including the Tamil families of the disappeared, whose protests and demands for answers have at times been met with threats, intimidation, and harassment by government security forces. 5, urges the international community to advocate for and protect the political rights and representation of the historically oppressed northeastern region of Sri Lanka and work towards a permanent political solution to address the underlying issues that led to ethnic conflict. 6, recommends the United States explore investigations and prosecutions pursuant to the recommendations of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights. And 7, urges that the United States works with the United Nations General Assembly, the United Nations Security Council, and the United Nations Human Rights Council to establish a credible and effective international mechanism for accountability for the grave crimes committed during the war in Sri Lanka. I encourage you all to take a look at the full text of the resolution. And again, thank you to Congresswoman Ross for her leadership on this issue and for her continual engagement with the Tamil community. Priya, back to you.
Thanks, Ernest. Next, we have Congresswoman Kathy Manning, an American lawyer and politician from the state of North Carolina. She serves as a member of House of Foreign Affairs Committee. She is genuinely concerned about Tamil human rights situations in Sri Lanka. Most recently, she joined force with her colleague, Representative Ross, and others in introducing the Sri Lanka May 18th resolution. Thank you very much for your support. Due to the congressional duties, she's unable to join in person or live. However, she has sent us a recorded message. So here's the message from Congresswoman Manning.
Good evening. I'm Congresswoman Kathy Manning, and I'm proud to represent North Carolina's 6th Congressional District. It's a great honor to be welcomed by the Tamil community as we come together on a difficult day for the Tamil people. Today, we remember tragic loss of life in the final stages of the war 12 years ago. I know that no words of comfort will truly ease the pain for the families of the victims, survivors, or the Tamil people, but know that we join you today in reflection, in mourning, in solidarity. The Tamil American community is a vibrant and valued part of our North Carolina family. I applaud you for your tireless work for justice and accountability on the Tamil Genocide Day of Remembrance. As we reflect after 12 years, we know the pain of victim survivor communities and the Tamil people is exacerbated by the lack of tangible progress on accountability for severe violations of human rights during the war and ongoing violations of human rights and the stifling of civil society. Whether in Sri Lanka, the broader Indo-Pacific region, or anywhere else, the commitment of the United States to the human rights of all people is resolute. It is this commitment from which we must lead. My concerns regarding the treatment of the Tamil people were heightened by a January report by the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, Michelle Bachelet, in which she wrote that Sri Lanka is proceeding on a trajectory that carries the seeds of future violence and conflict. Like my colleague Congresswoman Ross and High Commissioner Bachelet, I support the call for an international accountability mechanism for Sri Lanka. I was heartened by the progress demonstrated by UN Human Rights Council Resolution HRC 46-1, which was co-sponsored by the United States, which not only recognizes the lack of accountability for past violations of human rights, but also directs the Office of the Commissioner on Human Rights to collect, analyze, and preserve information and evidence for future accountability for gross violations of human rights. I have also joined my colleague, Congresswoman Ross, in co-sponsoring a resolution to recognize 12 years since the end of the war in Sri Lanka and honor the lives lost and express support for justice, accountability, reconciliation, reconstruction, reparation, and reform in Sri Lanka to ensure a lasting, peaceful political situation and a prosperous future for all people of Sri Lanka. It's critical that the Sri Lankan government not obstruct or interfere with the UN's evidence-gathering process. The government of Sri Lanka must respect the fundamental human rights of all people, and the Tamil people must have justice and accountability. As we move forward, we remember and mourn the lives lost, and we remain steadfast in our work together to build a future where the Tamil people can live in peace and freedom.
Appreciate the supportive message from Representative Manning. North Carolina Senator Jeff Jackson is a state legislator, veteran, former assistant district attorney, and current member of the Army National Guard. Jeff Jackson announced his candidacy for U.S. Senate back in January, and he has pledged to voice for justice for Tamil Genocide. Here is Senator Jackson.
Thank you for having me, and wonderful words from Congresswoman Ross and Congresswoman Manning that I subscribe to wholeheartedly. Thank you for the invitation. More importantly, thank you for the education. I didn't know a lot about this issue 6 months ago, but some of your leadership reached out to me and took the time to talk to me about history. Incidentally, Senator Nickel, who you're going to hear from next, he's been really instrumental in, I think, assisting your organization, but also getting me up to speed on the history that we're all talking about and the genocide that occurred. We are a nation that takes our history seriously, and if I were to move somewhere else, I know I would bring that history with me, which is to say, if I were you, I think I'd be doing exactly what many of you are doing. What's remarkable is that while so many of you here in the United States are very busy in your own lives, building your own futures, you have still found a highly effective way to make sure that this story is told and to make sure that your history is not erased, because that's how we make sure that history is not repeated. You are doing a tremendous service to your country. The people I've spoken to personally have been incredibly gracious with their time. And part of our obligation as elected officials is to acknowledge that, to acknowledge your history, to acknowledge your participation in making sure that it remains top of mind. And it's my obligation to thank you for those efforts. Looking forward to seeing you all soon. Looking forward to continuing this conversation. And I cannot speak highly enough about how effectively I think you all have pursued these ends. Thank you for taking the time to teach me about this history. See you all soon.
Thank you, Senator Jackson. For those who joined us from the US, especially from North Carolina, let's make sure we provide all of our support to get Senator Jeff Jackson elected in the next midterm election. Next, we have North Carolina State Senator Wiley Nickel. As you all know, Wiley is a long-term friend of Tamil Americans and a champion of justice for Tamil genocide. As many of you also know, he's the first elected US official to publicly acknowledge Tamil genocide. Here is Wiley Nickel.
Thank you so much for that warm introduction and welcome. It's so great to see so many friends. Vanakkam. Through the years, I've been grateful to know the Tamil community here in North Carolina as neighbors and dear friends. On this day of deep sadness, I am truly honored to join the global Tamil community in remembrance, mourning, and solidarity. 12 years ago, the Tamil people were victims of a genocide as the Sri Lankan government deliberately targeted Tamil civilian populations, resulting in the death of over 140,000 people in the final months of the war. Over successive Sri Lankan governments, there has been no meaningful accountability or justice for victims, and the Tamil community has continued to face discrimination and political oppression. Today, I stand with the Tamil community, the families of the victims, and with survivors in their demand for justice and accountability. As Dr. King once said, true peace is not merely the absence of tension, it is the presence of justice. For a peaceful and prosperous future for all people living in Sri Lanka, there must be justice for the Tamil genocide. That's why I'm honored to work with the Tamil American community as an advocate for accountability for the Tamil people in Sri Lanka. Together, we have worked to educate other elected leaders and the public on the plight of the Tamil people. A commitment to human rights and freedom in Sri Lanka is not only critical to the future of the Tamil people, but to the future of the entire Indo-Pacific region. And the United States must be clear, human rights violations cannot be committed with impunity. Listen, President Obama in his recent memoir said it very clearly. The UN failed to act to prevent ethnic slaughter in Sri Lanka. The US has an important place and an important role in the entire world to act. As we see countries focus on their own self-interest more and more, the US has that role as the country that can focus and work for peace and justice. That is our role. And that's why I'm excited about what we can do in this country and the trajectory we're going on this issue. The international community must reaffirm its commitment to human rights in Sri Lanka through an international accountability mechanism, and the US can play an important role. That's why I'm considering an appointment, of a special envoy of the President and the Secretary of State to Sri Lanka to help support the peace process and a long-term political solution. I've been heartened by the strong response by multiple members of Congress, including Representative Deborah, to the deteriorating human rights situation in Sri Lanka. I've also been encouraged to see important steps taken internationally by the US on Sri Lanka, including the co-sponsorship of UNHRC Resolution 46.1 to collect, analyze, and preserve evidence for future accountability process for gross violations of human rights. But we cannot rest until the Tamil people receive true justice and accountability. On this Tamil Genocide Remembrance Day, we reflect on the indelible pain experienced by the Tamil people. We mourn, we remember, and we reaffirm our commitment to justice. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Wiley. Appreciate your kind words. Up next, we have Ernest Rajakone. Ernest serves as a U.S. advocacy officer for Pearl. He works as a policy analyst for City of Pittsburgh and serves as a commissioner for Pennsylvania Governor's Advisory Commission on Asian Pacific American Affairs. Here's Ernest.
Good evening. I'm honored to be with you today on Tamil Genocide Remembrance Day. a difficult day for our people across the world as we remember the horrific final days of the armed conflict in Sri Lanka 12 years ago in Mullibaikkal. Today, we mourn the lives that were taken. Our hearts go out to the families of the victims and the survivors. Today, as they face intimidation from the Sri Lankan state, we stand with our community in the Tamil homeland in their right to memorialization. Just last week, a Mullibaikkal memorial monument was destroyed, and yesterday, on the eve of the Tamil Genocide Remembrance Day, Sri Lankan security forces cordoned off all roads leading to the Mullibaikkal Memorial Ground, despite a Mullitipu court order that Mullibaikkal commemorations could take place, provided COVID-19 regulations and social distancing measures are followed. And today, there have been multiple incidences of report and continued harassment and intimidation by the security forces. From the time of Sri Lanka's independence, single Buddhist nationalism of successive governments resulted in policies of discrimination and state-sponsored pogroms against the Tamil people, eventually culminating in a 26-year-long armed conflict that devastated the Tamil people. Throughout the course of the conflict, the Sri Lankan government severely limited freedom of the press and utilized abductions, torture, blatant targeting of civilian populations, and sexual violence as weapons of war. The final months of the war were marred by horrific acts of state-sponsored violence and credible allegations of war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide perpetrated against the Tamil people by the Sri Lankan government under the leadership of then President Mahinda Rajapaksa and his brother, then Secretary of Defense Gotabaya Rajapaksa. 12 years after the end of the conflict, there remains no justice for the Tamil people. The Rajapaksas have returned to power, advancing an increasingly authoritarian and ethnocratic agenda, marked by continuing oppression of the Tamil people through suffocating militarization of the Tamil homeland and stifling of civil society. This includes a militarized COVID-19 response, led by credibly accused war criminals such as Shavendra Silva and Kamal Gunaratne, which target Tamil and Muslim communities. 12 years after the war, rather than tangible progress on justice and accountability for the genocide committed, domestic impunity remains the norm. The international community's failure to protect the Tamil people during the height of the genocide and to hold the Sri Lankan government accountable afterwards to its international commitments enabled the Sri Lankan government to delay and ultimately deny the transition justice process. Any hope of justice and of a free future for the Tamil people requires meaningful action by the international community. This includes explicit recognition and condemnation of the Tamil genocide committed by the Sri Lankan state. While a positive step with the potential to lead to an international accountability mechanism, the March 2021 UN HRC resolution falls short of the demands made by Tamil civil society in Sri Lanka and failed to reflect the strong call for action set out by High Commissioner Michelle Bachelet's January 2021 report, which encouraged council members to seek alternative avenues for justice, such as targeted sanctions and universal jurisdiction. As High Commissioner Bachelet stated in her report, Sri Lanka is on an alarming path toward the occurrence of grave human rights violations. At this critical time, the United States must take action beyond the Council, especially in relation to bilateral engagement with the Sri Lankan state. The United States must demonstrate its resolute global commitment to human rights through bold leadership in support of civil and political rights for the Tamil people and international accountability in Sri Lanka. The United States must publicly and vocally condemn Sri Lanka's descent into authoritarianism, including its increasing attacks on human rights defenders and families of the disappeared. The United States must continue to advance accountability efforts and engagement with Sri Lanka through targeted sanctions such as asset freezes and travel bans to those credibly accused of human rights violations. And the United States must remain firm on the need for justice and accountability for Sri Lanka's genocide against the Tamil people through an international accountability mechanism. True reform of the Sri Lankan state, true reconciliation after the armed conflict, and a future in which the Tamil people are truly free to live in peace and dignity must come through justice and accountability. We gather here today because so much was lost a dozen years ago in Mullibaikkal. Today, as a Tamil American, I join our people as we remember the victims and survivors of the Tamil genocide and mourn our tremendous loss as a people. Even in this time of collective grief, I stand heartened and inspired to join you all in a continued commitment to justice, self-determination, and a free and peaceful future for the Tamil people. Thank you all.
Thank you, Ernest, for your second appearance and message tonight. Next, we have North Carolina students, Amaran and Ovia, reading a few passages from the documentations called Proceeding of the Second International Conference on Tamil Nation and Genocide in Sri Lanka and Endless War, Destroyed Land, Life, and Identity of the Tamil People in Sri Lanka. Amaran?
Thank you, Priya. Anaivarkum vanakkam. Hello, everyone. Tonight, I'll read a short summary from the Oakland Institute report, The Long Shadow of War, about how the Tamil regions in Sri Lanka are still heavily militarized by the Sri Lankan government. The Long Shadow of War estimated that in 2014, 5 years after the end of the war, approximately 160,000 soldiers, mostly Sinhalese, remained stationed in the north and east. This accounts for roughly one soldier for every 6 civilians. Little appears to have changed in recent years. The Sri Lankan Army has 7 regional headquarters, of which 5 are located in Jaffna, Kilnochi, Mullaitivu, Vavuniya, and Trikomali in the northern and eastern provinces. There are at least 89,000 soldiers stationed in the north. According to the 2012 census, the total population of the northern province is 1,058,762. Therefore, the level of militarization in the northern province is at least 1 soldier for every 12 civilians. 11 years after the end of the war, this high ratio of military amidst the civilians makes the northern province of Sri Lanka an extremely militarized place. Furthermore, the Air Force, Navy, Special Task Force, and the Special Commandos are not included in this calculation. If these statistics are also included in the calculation, the northern province remains militarized at a level of 1 soldier for every 6 civilians, even today. A 2017 report by the Adayalam Center for Policy Research and Pearl estimated that between 45,000 and 78,000 Army personnel are based in Mullaitivu district alone, suggesting a ratio of 1 soldier for every 2 civilians. The widespread presence of military personnel across the north and east, including the overt penetration into all aspects of civilian life and local economies, hinders the livelihoods of the local people. Ethnocratic states exercise selective openness and have a range of partial democratic features. Ethnicity, not citizenship, is a criterion for allocating power and resources. Minority populations are only given partial rights, leading to consistent ethnocratic civil tension. These are some of the criticisms of the state. 1. A dominant ethnic nation handles the state structures to control and determine the country's political system, institutions, economy, and geography. 2. Ethnic segregation and socioeconomic stratification are carried out strictly. 3. Ethnicized politics. 4. Political boundaries are not clearly defined to maintain dominance over co-minority races. 5. Ethnic segregation and socioeconomic stratification are carried out strictly. I want to conclude my reading with this quote from Martin Luther King Jr. History will have to record that the greatest tragedy of this period of social transition was not the strident clamor of bad people, but the appalling silence of the good people. Thank you.
Ovia, if you can go next, please.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Ovia Lungovan, and I'll now be reading a condensed summary from the Oakland Institute report, The Long Shadow of War, about how Tamil culture is being erased in Sri Lanka by government institutions. Apart from the changing demographics in the north and east, The Long Shadow of War documented an aggressive government-led effort to replace Tamil culture and history with the establishment of victory monuments and Buddhist temples dedicated to the Sinhalese domination on the ruins of the Tamil homeland. Since the end of the war, numerous land seizures have been recorded, particularly for the construction of Buddhist viharas and monuments and the general replacement of Tamil culture. Tamil parliamentarians accused the President of Sri Lanka of creating the task force to encroach the native lands of the Tamil under the guise of archaeological preservation. the Archaeological Department is accelerating land grabbing operations in various parts of the northern province. On January 18, 2021, Vidura Vikramanayaka, Sri Lanka's State Minister for National Heritage, accompanied by Army soldiers and Archaeology Department officers, placed a Buddha statue on the site of an ancient Hindu temple, Adi Ayyanar Temple, located at Kurunturmalai in Mullativa district. A trident, divine symbol of Hindus, placed in the site of the temple was removed and excavations were to take place. Although Buddhist monks have been trying to occupy the temple area and erect a Buddha statue since 2018, it had not been possible due to strong opposition from local communities. The court ruled in 2018 that no changes should be made in the area and stated that Archaeology Department had abused its power in allowing Buddhist monks to survey the area. But in defiance of the court order, the National Heritage Ministry, the Army, and the Archaeology Department placed a statue of Buddha in the area. All these activities aim to immediately or gradually establish Sinhalese settlements, Buddhist temples, and geographical fragmentation of the North and East Tamil homeland. Government institutions such as Mahawali Authority, Archaeological Department, Forest Department, and Wildlife Department were organized to facilitate these racially oppressive operations. These activities are carried out in a well-planned and structured manner behind the slogans of democracy, one country, one law, and constitutional law. Ethnocratic countries often experience ethnic tension, which causes instability. Sri Lanka's history over the last several decades has been marked by deep ethnic divisions and instability, culminating in a 30-year brutal civil war. The information revealed in this report and others, including the recent report by High Commissioner for Human Rights, Michelle Bachelet, demonstrates that Sri Lanka has been moving towards rigorous ethnocratic structures and activities since the end of the Civil War in 2009. As rightly pointed out by High Commissioner Bachelet, the situation in Sri Lanka represents clear early warning signs of a deteriorating human rights situation and a significantly heightened risk of future violations, and therefore calls for strong preventative action. Thank you.
Thank you, Amaran and Novia. Next is Thirumurugan Gandhi from Tamil Nadu, India. He's a Tamil human rights activist and geopolitical commentator noted for founding the May 17th movement. Here is Mr. Gandhi.
Thank you all. And it's a 12th anniversary of the Remembrance Day of the Tamil Genocide committed by the Sri Lankan government in the Tamil de facto state. And when the speakers addressed here before me clearly explained the nature of the Sinhalese chauvinism and the intention of the committing a genocide, and what happened in the 2009 and the post-genocide period. Yes, well explained by the panelists here. And we are really thankful. I mean, we are really thankful for giving us an opportunity to discuss this the Chauvinist regime's action in the South Asian region. And I say I'm from the Indian subcontinent, and we are very much close to the Sri Lanka. And we also our people also are a victim of the Sri Lankan genocidal intentions. And I belong to a state called Tamil Nadu, and we are just about 15 kilometers away from the island. And we have our fishermen, Tamil fishermen, been fishing in the waters that's a common to the India and the Sri Lanka. It is a traditional fishing rights section, and they have the traditional fishing rights. And by the Sri Lankan Navy, nearly for the past 30 years, nearly around 700 fishermen been murdered by the armed forces of the Sri Lanka. And we know that this has been happening because the genocidal nature of the Sri Lankan regime. The Sri Lankan military and the regime, I mean, I never have any respect for the international human rights law or any law for that matter. I mean, because killing in a neighboring country's fishermen is again a violation of the international law. So we have to understand the nature of the Sri Lankan constitution, which is a unitarian constitution, which we can say that it never included the aspirations of the Tamil people. And if the decolonization process had to be complete, then the island need to be put on to the structure which was before the colonial occupation. And if you look at the history of what happened before colonization, is that Tamil people have their own kingdom and the Sinhalese people their own. They have their own kingdom. So it's a two-nation island, and just because of the administrative purposes, Sri Lanka was made as one country by the British rulers. And unfortunately, the Sinhalese Chauvinist elites are holding the power, and they are persecuting the Tamil people, and they built a military based on their aspirations. This military is Sri Lankan military is known for the violations of human rights law, and they didn't have any respect for the people's rights. And they have committed crimes against its own people or the people of Tamil Eelam. And also they have a history of committing crimes against the Tamil fishermen from the Tamil Nadu and from the Indian subcontinent. And when the US, when the Sri Lankan force has been sent as UN peacekeepers in the Haiti, they indulged in the various kinds of violations, and they've been charged for the crimes. And that is the nature of the Sri Lankan armed forces, because wherever they've been sent, wherever they have the opportunity to commit a crime, they'll happily do it. And this need to be checked, and this need to be brought under the accountability, and that accountability to happen not on the national level or on a regional level. It need to happen on international level. The international community should come forward to constitute a mechanism to investigate the crimes perpetrated by the Sri Lankan regime during the final stages of war, and not only that, post-war situations also. And what kind of a country that believes in the military instead of believing a constitution to run a nation? And Sri Lanka believes more onto the military than onto the its own civilian or the constitutional framework. And if you look at the history of Tamil people over the years, and they very much stick to the non-violent way of expressing their aspirations, and they did so in the 70s, and they shown their willingness to have their own nation and exercise the right of self-determination to protect their dignity. Because why we are talking about right to self-determination is because the highest form of human right is the dignity. And our Tamil people want to live in peace and want to have their fundamental rights, and want to protect their the generation, their language, their culture, and things like that. But it all boils down to one word, as they want to live in dignity. Under the Sri Lankan regime, the Tamil people being treated as a secondary citizens, and which is no way a kind of a dignified life to any modern civilizations. I mean, so it is the duty of the international community to come on their own to brand this Sri Lankan government as an illegal government and have a criminal in nature. And we should stop this violations that is happening in the South Asian region. Otherwise, it will become a norm in the region, because the failure of the international community to bring brought the Sri Lankan government into the accountability created a chaos in the Myanmar government, and we've seen the action. That committed against the people, the state terrorism that committed against its own citizens in the island. It's also being recognized as a legitimate method in the Myanmar. It happened in the Kachin. It happened to the Kachin people, and then to the Rohingya Muslims, and now it's entire Myanmar is under the state terrorism. So if we don't stop the state violation at one place, it will become it's a kind of an epidemic, I mean, it's spread to other regions, other nations and other regions. And we are very much critical of our own government and Indian government, which stood in silence by not stopping the Sri Lankan government to commit a genocide in the island. Instead, I mean, we are really ashamed that Indian government is collaborating with the Sri Lankan government, and they are also compensated with this genocide. Is what we accuse from the Indian subcontinent. And if you look at the South Asian region, the chauvinist nature or racist nature or the religious fundamentalism has got close networks. The Hindu religious fundamentalist organization, RSS, which has got inspiration from the Mussolini's fascist movement from the 1920s, have close political relationship with the Podubala Sena of, which is a Sinhalese Buddhist chauvinist movement, as we branded as a kind of what do you say? It's a movement that incite violence. And this Buddha Sena and RSS have got a close understanding with the 969 Buddhist chauvinist movement of the Myanmar. So if you look closely in the South Asian region, this chauvinist, religious, racist, fundamentalist movement are influencing their own government and destabilizing the entire region and destabilizing the peace and harmony. So in order to bring the order of the human rights in this region, it is very much important that the Sri Lankan government to bring into the accountability and international investigation need to be happen for the crime of genocide on the Sri Lankan government. And we very much confident that international community will come forward and recognize what happened to the Elam Tamils is a genocide, nothing but a genocide. Because what we are saying, we are seeing, this kind of an campaign will help international community to understand that Tamils are deprived of their rights, and genocide being committed in 2009, and it's been continuing this genocide to till date. And around 11 years before, May 17 movement issued a statement to the state of Tamil Nadu here in India, that how Armenian people are fighting for recognition of what being committed onto its people as a genocide. We Tamil people are also fighting for the for the recognition of the crimes that is committed against Tamil people as a genocide. Same with that, we've been requesting our friends in the United States to recognize what happened in Tamil Elam is nothing but a genocide of Tamils. By recognizing this democratic demand and upholding the rights of the victims, and we will strengthen the image of the Statue of Liberty. And Statue of Liberty, it stands there tall and strong to inform the world that liberty and dignity is most important thing of life for humans. So and peoples of the world have the right to self-determination, and decolonization will happen only when the right to self-determination is being exercised. And it has been passed as a resolution as a decolonization declaration in 1960s in the United Nations. And so we should not forget that decolonization haven't happened in the island. So what we call upon our friends is to uphold this right to self-determination, rights of the Tamil people as a fundamental right of Tamil people, and stop the genocidal Sri Lankan regime committing further crimes, and bring them to the accountability, and let there be an international impartial investigation on the crime of genocide for the crimes committed against the Tamil people by the Sri Lankan government, and as well as to have their sovereignty, to lead their dignified life, to ensure that the investigation moves into the right direction, let the Tamil people have the right to self-determination and let them choose their fate. I mean, by going on the process of referendum, which is a democratic process internationally, and we are really what's say that why international community is hesitating to have a referendum, which is very much in a democratic process. As my friend Gajendrakumar aptly recollected that in 1976 and 77, there is a right to vote resolution that called for an independent nation for Tamil people, and it has been put onto the election campaign, and the Tamil people overwhelmingly supported. I mean, roughly about 97% and plus people supported that resolution. So we have that demand and through a democratic process, and so we request the international community to have a democratic process like a referendum in the north and east of Sri Lanka and the Tamil motherland, and let them decide their choice. And that is the way that democracy can work. And let's put the international order for international willingness to establish a democracy across the world, and let us establish the democracy in the island of Sri Lanka by establishing a state for Tamil people, and let the Tamil bring peace and justice and stability, and more importantly, the dignity to the people of not only the people of Tamils, also people of the poor innocent Sinhalese. So let them have a peaceful life, and let Tamil people live in dignity and be recognized by the Sinhalese people, and let the international community come forward, at least now after 12 years, to establish democracy in this region. And thank you for the opportunity, and thank you one and all.
Priya, you are on mute.
Apologies. Thank you, Mr. Gandhi, for your insightful speech and your tireless efforts in Tamil Nadu, India. Before we conclude this evening, many thanks to all of you for attending today's Tamil Genocide Remembrance Day gathering. Special thanks to all speakers from US, Tamil Nadu, and Ulam. Thank you to all who made this event possible by working tirelessly behind the scenes. Special thanks to Emma Larson, Shane Greer, Ryan Mulchi, Caroline Musumara, and Emilia Brown for your support in organizing this event. Also, thanks to Pearl for your continuous invaluable support, and Ottawa Tamil Association for assisting with the social media campaign. Have a good evening. Thank you.